everybody, welcome back to Glenn's Garage and welcome back to the 300ZX project. So we're ongoing with the brake suspension work here, and what I thought today I'd look at is the front brakes. We're going to start to pull those apart and I'll show you the process for doing a brake job, and that's what you're doing. In our case, we're taking them apart because the strut and everything's coming out, but the brake portion will be the same if you're doing brakes and rotors. Okay, so car's jacked up, wheels off, jack stand. I'll say it probably every time I work on a car like this on the videos. Put a jack stand, jack stands. Make sure you're safe. I leave the jack under as well if I possibly can, just as a backup. I think I'm getting more cautious in my old age, but don't want to get squished. So anyway, be safe. Now, if you got that off there, this is your brake assembly here. So anyone who's maybe not that familiar with brakes and want to tackle this job by themselves, rotor, hub, caliper. So the caliper in this case consists of effectively two pieces. Is the actual caliper with the piston in that, if you will, interacts with the pads to squeeze the rotor, and there's the carrier frame here, or I forget what the manual calls it, torque frame or something, but anyway. So those are really effectively the two pieces. Your pads sit either side there, and it's bolted to the hub spindle at the back, and you've got a splash shield here, and of course your strut. Okay, so there are a bolt top and bottom with these slider pins. So these pins move in and out, allow the caliper to move, to clamp, and then obviously as it wears. So there's one at the top, one at the bottom here. If you're purely just doing pads, you can remove the one at the bottom. You can rotate the caliper up, leaving this one in place. You can remove the pads. You can push the piston back with just a C-clamp on it and put new pads in, rotate it down, put that back in. In most cases, chances are you're doing pads, you're doing rotors, so this has to come off, and obviously this has to come off, which is what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so first job, I'm going to release the clip here that holds this flex line to the strut. That's going to let me move this caliper out of the way. It's got to be off anyway because I'm taking this out, but that will allow you to move the caliper out of the way without straining any of the lines. Okay, next job, we're going to take the two, I'll do it that way so you can see, the two slider pins here out, and then we can lift this caliper out of the way and we can hang it. I've got a coat hanger here, we'll hang it off the suspension. So again, so it doesn't strain brake lines. Okay, that's one. There's two. So I'm just leveraging this. I should have done it before I took the bolts out, but I'm leveraging this to try and move the piston back a bit, just to give me a little bit of room, and there we go. So there's the caliper, there's your piston. That's the caliper out of the way. I'm just going to rest it here for a moment. Take the pads out. Ah, there we go. Okay. So pads out. So these should be smooth and easy to move, and they are, which is good. So now we've got two 17 mil socket bolts to get this carrier frame out of the way. I'll put all the tools you need on the description as well, if anyone, so you don't have to keep going back here and go, what size did he say? Okay, so I use my small breaker bar here to crack those two carrier bolts loose. I might have said earlier in the video they were 17 mil socket. It's a 19 mil socket. So again, it'll be written down in the description, but alright, that's one out. Get the second one out. We'll get this carrier out of the way. Okay. Alright, so that's the carrier out of the way. Again, I've got them off for the suspension work, and I'm going to paint them all up. So put that to one side. That's going to get cleaned up and painted. Alright, so to start getting the rotor off, I've got to take the dust cap off first so we can get to the spindle nut under here. So get a screwdriver, start prying away at it. Yeah, alright, we'll just pack that with a little more grease when it all goes back together. Okay, split pin here, so we'll get the split pin out, get this retainer out, and then get the nut off. Alright, it's out. Replace it, put a new one in when you put everything back together. And we take that castle retainer clip off, and that leaves the nut there. It shouldn't be on tight, it's just snugged up to ensure the bearings are set right. Yep, there we go. And this should, there we go. Okay, here's your rotor assembly off. So if you're replacing rotors, you're gonna have to remove this hub off the rotor assembly here. I've just put some rags, paper towels in here so I don't contaminate the area where the bearing goes. And if you look on the back here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts. I believe they're 14 mil socket. Take those off and it will remove the hub assembly from the rotor. Okay. Make sure you keep the lock washers that go hold these back in place. It's going to need banging. Alright, so the original video I took of disassembling the hub from the rotor corrupted in some way, so I've already had it apart, but I will show you how I finally got it apart. I put it up on a couple of pieces of 2x4 here, and then go in here where each of the backs of the studs are. I used a impact socket, and then I just hit with a hammer one at a time, going around firm but not abusive, and it works its way out. And I'll probably just push it, it'll come out now. There we go. So it sits effectively, sits snugly in these places here. We've got the new rotors in now, so we're just going to go through the process of installing the rotors back onto the wheel hub here. Alright, so that's in place. We've got the fasteners here, 5 bolts and 5 lock washers. I'll just snug them up with the impact here, and then we'll torque them down with the torque wrench. The manual will specify between 36 and 51 foot-pounds of torque for each of the bolts here. I've set the torque wrench at 50, and I'm just going to tighten them in a star pattern. It doesn't say anything in the manual, but just like putting the wheel on, I'm just going to use a star pattern to tighten these up. Okay, so I've got them all just snugged up now. I've slipped a wrench in here with a bar on it in between two of the wheel studs to stop it spinning, because it's a little hard to hold it otherwise and get sufficient torque. There we go. All right. Ready to install in the car. Okay, so finally, we're going to be installing the brakes. Put the brakes back on the car. It's been quite a few weeks, but we have front suspension rebuilt, restored. Everything's ready there. I've got all my parts and everything here ready to go, so we're finally ready to get these back on. So first step, we'll get some grease on the spindle. Then we're going to clean the rotors because they'll have a protective coating on them, which is why they haven't rusted. They've been sitting here for weeks. So yeah, brake clean the rotors, and then we'll get the bearing packed and on the car. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is give the spindle and everything a good wipe down. It's been sitting here for quite a few weeks. Okay, so before clean the rotor, I'm going to put some grease in here. Now inside the hub there's a cavity. You want that packed with grease before you slide that on. So I'm going to do that first because I'm going to end up with greasy fingers on this, and then I'll clean it all off and put it on the spindle. Okay, alright, so that's packed out. Okay, slide the rotor on. And we'll pop the bearing in. I've done my best not to touch the rotors, but I will give it a final clean up. Alright, so now we're going to snug this up. Now technically there is a spec in the manual for how tight this should be, but I have always just snugged them up so they feel like there's limited resistance to it rolling. You don't want it too tight, you're going to wear out the bearing, it'll heat up, and you don't want it to. Yeah, that seems just a little bit tight there. I think that's good. Alright, so now he's going to put this, not a castle nut, but it's a castle fitting. And we can put the split pin through. Do not forget the split pin, otherwise this whole thing is going to come flying off. Alright, so some grease in the dust cap. Put that on, give it a light tap. Okay, so next step we're going to put the carrier frame on. These are the bolts that came off with the lock washers. 19 mil socket. so they're on. I'm going to torque them down later. Once I've got the caliper all on, I will use the torque wrench, snug those up. Okay, so we're just popping the pads in now. There we go. The one with the wear indicator goes to the inside. Alright, so got the pads slid in place now. If you're using an anti-squeak lubricant on, this would be the time to put it on. I don't personally. I have not used that in 40 years, and I'm going to say I haven't had a problem. But that is clearly your choice. So I'm certainly not in the position to tell anyone what to do about stuff like that. So anyway, we're going to slip the actual caliper on now. Put the two slider bolts. Okay, we'll snug those up. And then just checking the size here. They're down already. That's 14. Yep, 14 mil socket. Okay, so I'm going to torque the slider pins first. The spec from Nissan is 16 to 23 foot-pounds. I've got it set at about 20. Okay, those tight, snugged up. Okay, I'm going to do the main carrier bolts now. Alright, so last thing to do, the retaining clip for the flexible brake line onto the back of the strut here. So we'll just pop that on. Okay, all done. I think it looks pretty darn good. I should point out, if you're replacing well-worn pads, you will have to push the piston back in the caliper there. You can put a C-clamp on it. Mine were very new pads on here, so the piston wasn't extended very far. So all I did is I just put a screwdriver into the vents here, and I pushed this caliper, which will help squeeze the piston the last bit back. But if it's extended for any amount, just put a C-clamp on it and you'll get it back into. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I hope the video was helpful if you're going to be doing a brake job or any work on the front end here. As always, a like, a subscribe would be awesome for the channel. And check out the other videos. I mean, we're working on this 300ZX till it's restored. And there's some old ones from other projects as well. So check it all out. And in the meantime, drive safe, everybody. You have a great day, and I hope I see you back here in the garage.